Hello, everyone. We welcome you to the second part of the three-part exam prep series on MB-310 Microsoft Dynamics 365 Finance. I'm Monica from TechnoFocus, and I will be serving as your moderator today. We are glad to have V. Chen with us, who will be presenting this session. Now I'd like to turn today's event over to our presenter. V, you have the floor now.
Hello everyone, welcome to Microsoft Dynamics 365 Finance MB-310 Exam Preparing Virtual Online Training. My name is Wei Chen. I'm Microsoft Certified Trainer. Now let's learn on Module 3, Work with Account Payable and Account Receivable. Before we start using Account Payable, we should have a General Ledger and a Cash and a Bank Management module configured. In addition, we also need to set up account payable payment journals. Sometimes a customer or vendor might agree to pay one invoice by using a series of installment payment based on the predefined payment schedule. The payment schedule configuration key must be selected before you can set up payment schedule for an order. To set up a payment schedule, we need to define number of the installment, amount of each installment, due date for each installment, a payment schedule consisting of consecutive payment in the set of time intervals. The payment can be a set up amount, a specific number of a payment in which the amount owed is divided to the create equal payment. When an invoice that has payment schedule is posted, a separate invoice line transaction is created based on the due date of each line of the payment schedule. The original sales transaction or purchase transaction remains unchanged, and the several open payment transactions are linked to the original transaction. For example, an invoice of $10,000 is recorded. It is paid at $2,000 each month until the balance is paid. During this period, the invoice is not considered past due if the scheduled payments are made on time. This is also known as finance plan or contract payment. The method of allocation in the payment schedule could be total amount outstanding on the invoice due. Fixed amount, a specific fixed amount is due for each payment on the specified payment date. Fixed quantity, payments of the total amount is divided into the fixed quantity of the payment. Specified, a specified amount is due on each specified payment date. If a specified is selected, the payment schedule and amount need to be defined on the payment line fast tab. Depending on the value selected in the allocation list, different fields are enabled on the general and payment lines fast tab. For example, if a total is selected in the allocation list, no other fields are enabled on the general fast tab. Payment schedule setup is shared between account payable module and account receivable module. We use the term payment page to define all the terms of payment used by company and their vendors. Use terms of payment for calculation of due date based on the date of the invoice. We can specify terms of payment for vendor on the vendor page, customer on the customer page, purchase order on the purchase order page, sales order on the sales order page. For example, Seahorse Retailer SRHQ has a standard vendor payment terms of net 30 days. If an invoice within the net 30 payment terms ship goods on the September 15 and the invoice is dated on November 15, then payment is due on December 15. With net 30 days settlement, SRHQ must pay the net due within 30 days of the invoice date. According to the settlement, after that date, if the payment is not completed, an interest charge of the specific percent per month can be added to the invoice. Other service charge may also apply. In a term of payment, is linked to the payment schedule. The rows set up in the terms of payment are used to calculate the due date of the first installment. The rows set up in the payment schedule are used to calculate the due date of the following installment. If cash on deliver COD payment method is selected and the cash payment is enabled, it indicates the payment should be made in cash and not by check. Therefore, the ledger posting area in the cash field, we need to select the main account for settlement of invoice that will be used for cash payment. Part of the terms of payment setup, there is a payment days. We will use payment days to determine the payment day used for calculating the due date. The due date is always rounded up to the nearest specified date. Payment day can be specified for either a day in a week or in the month. Cash discount can be set up for both customer and vendor and can apply both sales order and purchase order. Customers obtain a cash discount when they pay their invoice in the specified period of time. And the same, the legal entity can also obtain the cash discount from the vendor. For example, Seahorse retailer SHQ obtains a cash discount if it pays vendor invoice within certain date. SHQ has set up following code: 5D 10%, cash discount for 10% when the amount is paid within 5 days. 10D 5%, cash discount of 5% when the amount is paid within 10 days. 14D 2%, cash discount of 2% when the amount is paid within 14 days. The three cash discounts can be linked each other occur sequentially as the cash discount date near. However, only one cash discount is generated. To specify the cash discount following the 5-day 10% code, the 10 days 5% code is selected in the next discount date list. For 10 days 5% code, the 14-day 2% code is selected in the next discount code list. For 14-day 2% code, the next discount code is left blank. After cash discount being set up, we can assign cash discount to vendors, journals, or purchase order. There is a cash discount administration field setup where we go to account payable setup, account payable parameter page. On the settlement tab in the cash discount administration field and select what we want to do with the overpayment or underpayment when the cash discount is not deducted. This account payable parameter must be set up correctly before the invoice is settled. If we select unspecified, the underpayment amount is posted to the vendor's cash discount account. If the applicable cash discount was posted in the same company as the overpayment, finance and operations will adjust cash discount. If the applicable cash discount was not posted in the same company as the overpayment, it is posted to the system cash discount account. If there are multiple cash discounts so that an overpayment was settled against a multiple invoice, the adjustment to the discount is from the last invoice to the first discount. If we select specific, the overpayment or underpayment amount is posted to the vendor cash discount account. To better understanding these two options, let's see example here. The vendor's invoice total is $105 and the obtained cash discount is $10.50. Consider the cash discount. The vendor will pay $94.50 US, which is $105 minus $10.50. However, the amount actually paid to the vendor is $95. If the cash discount administration parameter is set to unspecific, the invoice is settled and the difference of 50 cents US dollar is opposed to the ledger account specified for the cash discount difference. If cash discount administration parameter is set to specific, the invoice is settled and the difference to 50 cents dollars is posting to the vendor's cash discount account. The specify that each discount is calculated based on the amount plus the sales tax. We need to enable cash discount is calculated on amount include the sales tax option in the vendor cash discount area, where we can find the setting by go to account payable, setup, general ledger parameters, and then click the sales tax tab, expand the tax option fast tab. In Dynamics 365 finance operations, account payable user can set up payment fee for additional charge of the payment from bank. The charge can be with vendor or ledger. For example, a vendor might add a fee for issuing a promise note, or a company might be charged a vendor bank remittance fee. We need to select whether to charge the vendor or ledger to use the financial cost for the fee in the charge field. Ledger is used when the fee will be expensed to our organization. If ledger is selected, select account in the main account field for posting the ledger. Vendor is used when the fee will be assessed to the vendor. After the payment fee ID is created, we continue to define when the fee should be default on the journal by select the value for the journal type field. This journal type is typically vendor bank remittance. We can define a payment fee to set up line for each fee used for different bank, method payment, remittance type, payment specification, currencies, time period, and amount intervals. In the company agrees with the bank to specify the payment, select the payment specification in the payment specification field and select the currency that enables the fee in the currency field. Only transaction with this currency can enable the fee. If we leave this field blank, all currency enable the fee. If the fee is a percentage, enter the percentage. If the fee is amount, enter the amount of the fee. If the fee is interval, use the interval tab to define the tiered fees that depends on the interval between the remittance and the due date. If a sales tax is calculated, the net amount is posted on the ledger account and the sales tax amount is posted on the sales tax account. We can also enter the fee for the select payment fee setup line. Posting profile are common throughout all modules in financial operations. In account payable, posting profile, also called vendor posting profile. During implementation, the summary account are defined for vendor. Summary account are temporary account where all invoices are posted and the offset to the vendors is paid. We can assign posting profile to all vendor or group of vendors or a single vendor. When we post a vendor transaction automatically, financial operations search for the ledger account. If a posting profile line exists for the vendor, this line is used. If no posting profile lines exist for the vendor, however, the line specified for the vendor group that the vendor is attached to is used. If neither of these exists, the posting profile line for all vendors are used. We can set up many vendor posting profile in vendor posting profile page. If all vendor transactions are processed together, we set up only one posting profile for all vendors. Please do not forget, after we create vendor posting profile, we need to select one as a default posting profile in the account payable parameter. This is a mandatory setup for account payable module. Vendor is defined as a company purchase goods and service from. Each account payable transaction must be associated with a vendor. Use the vendor page to create, maintain, and inquiry about vendors. Always enter as much as possible information when we set up a finance operation for vendor, because that data is used throughout the system for invoice payment and reports. The base data automatically appears as a default for all transactions involving the vendor, but default information can always be changed if we need to override. We recommend setting up a default language for the legal entities so it cascades throughout all modules. This reason is that the language code is required when we create external documents, such as purchase order. If alternative delivery addresses are in different states or countries regions, ensure that we enter appropriate tax group for each alternative address. We need to associate tax group with delivery address. Enter the maximum outstanding amount allowed in the balance of the vendor's account in the credit limit field. This amount is always stated in the account currency. If for any business requirement need to put vendor on hold, we can apply vendor hold by click vendor tab, then click on hold button in the maintain group of the action pane. The following type of holds are available. No means the vendor has no hold. All types of transactions are permitted. Invoice means no invoice can be created or posted for this vendor. All means all transactions for this vendor are not allowed. They are all on hold. Payment means no payment can be generated for this vendor. Payment that we generated before the hold was applied can still be posted. Requisition means no requisition can be generated for this vendor. Never means prevent vendor from being put on hold for inactivity. After selecting the type of vendor hold, we then can select the release date and the reason code for the vendor hold in the same drop-down menu. Many companies offer several methods to pay due invoice, such as credit, cash in advance, bill of exchange, check, or electronic payment. When we set up method payment for vendor, we can enter the number of the days that are added to the cash discount date or the due date to define the broadest period of the time in which cash discount could be obtained. In other words, we can enter the number of days the vendor make the payment of the specified method of discount and still give cash discount in the grace period field. We can select what type of a payment is allowed in the payment type field. The available options are other, which is the default value. The method payment is none of the other choice, or means that method payment is not yet assigned. Check means the method payment is a check. Electronic payment means the method payment is electronic, such as electronic funds transfer EFT. When this payment type is used, the system performs bank validation that are skipped if we use other payment type. Promise note means the method of payment is the promise note. We must enable the allow copy of payment field to allow user to print non-negotiable copy of the payment for the selected method of payment. We might need to print copies of a payment to resolve payment disputes or to let vendor know which invoice will paid on particular date. With using method payment page, we can specify all the method payment that our company use to pay vendors. For each method of payment, enter the information that states how payment should be summarized and posted. method of payment can be assigned to the vendor, journals, and purchase order in the account payable module. On the method of payment page, we can select whether the system should total the invoice in the automatic payment proposal. Here are options available in the method of payment. Invoice means creates one payment transaction for each invoice. Date means the system combines the payment for all invoices for vendors with the same due date. Week means system combines the payment for all invoices for the vendors with the due date within the same week. Total means system combines all invoices from vendors for the same payment. Sometimes, if we need to track purchase amount in addition to line item amount, we can use charge code. For example, we might pay freight and insurance on a purchase order, and this amount might be itemized separately on the purchase order. We can specify whether this amount are posted to expense account or whether they are added to the cost of items. If we are validating charges for account payable, and if the charges are calculated as a fixed amount instead of a percentage, this value must be less than the maximum amount that's specified in the charges code page. Sometimes charges uses different currency from the transaction currency. If this is the case, in the charge currency code field, specify a currency for the charge to use a different currency that is specified in the currency field. This is possible if the debit or credit type is either ledger account or item for the selected charges code. Specify a starting amount to apply the auto charge to in the from amount field. In the to amount field, specify the ending amount to apply the auto charge to. In this context, amount refers to the order total. To define tiered charges, we can specify a from amount and a to amount only if we define auto charge at the mean level and its category as a fixed or percent. We can automatically apply charges to the purchase order by define auto charge. For example, a vendor is located outside the specified vicinity. Automatic charges, which are referred to as auto charges, are applied to automatically when we create a purchase order. We can define auto charge for specific vendor, item, or group of vendor. We can also define auto charge that apply to all vendor, customer, items. The View Settlement button on the action pane provides quick access to settle history and detailed information about the settlement transaction. You can also see other transactions that are related to the select transactions, either because they are part of the same settlement or because they are payments that were created in the same payment journal. To view settlement, you go to Account Payable Vendor, All Vendors, select a vendor that has transactions, and then on the Action pane on the Vendor tab, select Transaction. Select a transaction to research, and then on the Action pane, select the View Settlement. Settle invoice and payment. Go to Account Payable, Vendor, All Vendors. Select the vendor whose open transaction you want to settle. To settle open vendor transactions, on the Action pane, click Invoice tab and then click Settle Transaction. In the Settle Posting Date field, select whether the posting settlement transaction using the date of the most recent transaction, today's date, or the date that you specified. Optionally, to designate one of the transactions as a primary payment transaction, select the transaction and then click Mark Payment. The purpose of the primary payment is to settle all the other transactions that are selected. The transaction date of the primary payment is used in cash discount calculations and exchange rate calculation. If a primary payment is selected, the cross rate can be entered. Select the mark checkbox on the other open transaction to be settled. A red icon indicates that transaction is already marked for settlement. Enter the cross rate for each transaction that you select to be settled with a primary payment transaction. Then click Update. The marked transactions are offset against each other. In some cases, it is more convenient to use automatic settlement of invoice and payment. For example, if a company has a lot of vendors with a few payments, perform following step to enable automatic settlement. Go to the account payable, setup, vendor posting profile, set the relevant vendor posting profile, click the table restriction fast tab, select the settlement checkbox. That will enable the automatically settlement. We use account receivable to track customer invoice and incoming payment. We can create customer invoice that are based on sales orders or packing slip. We can also enter free tax invoices that are not related to the sales order. We can receive payment by using several different payment types. This includes bills of change, cash, checks, credit card, and electronic payment. If our organization includes multiple legal entities, we can use centralized payment to record payment in a single legal entity on behalf of other legal entity. We have talked about vendor payment in account payable. Same, account receivable also offers extensive functionality to set up different customer payment options, payment schedule, payment days, terms of payment, cash discount, method of payment, payment fee. As I have already mentioned, the payment setup in account receivable is the same setup in account payable. In other words, both modules use the shared payment setup. There are cash discount, terms of payment, payment days, payment schedule. Each account receivable transaction must be associated with customer. Use the customer page to create, maintain, and inquire about customers. Enter as much data as possible in advance because the data is used throughout the system for invoicing, payment reports. The base data is automatically displayed as default for all transactions that involve the customer. We can change default information at any time. To speed up the process of creating customer, we can create a template based on the entries in field for specific customer that we specify as a template model. This is about record template function. We have discussed and demoed in MB-300 Dynamics 365 Unified Operations Core Fundamental courses. Before we can set up customer, we must to set up customer group. We can use customer group to set up certain information that always default when we are entering a new customer. For example, use a customer group to set up automatic posting to general ledger account for revenue that is generated by the customer. We can set up a ledger account for the automatic transactions that are generated in connection with the receipt and issue of inventory. In the customer group page, we can set up any number of customer group. At least one customer group must be set up because customer group must be specified when we set up a new customer. Customer workflow has been added. We can change specific field for customer and then send those changes for approval by using the workflow before they are added to the customer. Before we can use customer workflow feature, we must enable it by go to account receivable setup, account receivable parameter. On the general tab on the customer approval fast tab, set the enable customer approval option to yes to enable the feature for new customer approval. Then In the data entity behavior field, select the behavior that the data entity should use when data imported. Option allow changes without approval means all entity can update the customer records without processing it through the workflow. Option reject changes means changes cannot be made to the customer record. The import will fail for the fields that are enabled for workflow. Option create change proposal means all the fields will be changed except the fields that are enabled for workflow. The new value for those fields will be added to the customer as proposed change, and the workflow will be started automatically. In the list of customer fields, select then enable checkbox for every field that must be approved before the change can be made. Charges are usually two for additional amount to the sales transactions where customers are ordering special item or we have a fixed charges that we want to apply to type of orders. This can then be charged to the customer. Example could include a handling fee for special item, some sort of surcharge for different class of customer, setup fee for orders. There are many different reasons why we could add the charge. Here's a quick walkthrough of setting up the customer charge or code and use it in the sales order processing. We can define auto charge for customer, specific customer, or a group of customer, or all customer. Item, specific item, or group of item, or all items, or based on the mode of delivery of the orders. Please remember, first and foremost, we will have to ask the system to look for auto charge where a sales order is created. We define this in account receivable setup, account receivable parameters. In the account receivable parameters, go to the price tab and tick the field for find auto charge for header and find auto charge for line as applicable. Second, we need to set up customer charge group. Customer charge group are required only if we have group of customer for whom we need to define auto charges. If the charges is applicable for all the customer or just for a particular customer, we will not require to set up customer charge group. If we define a customer charge group, we would also have to associate our customer to the group. We can do this on the sales order default tab of the custom master form. The third steps is we need to set up item charge groups, which are required only if we have a group of a product for which we need to define auto charge. If the charge is applicable for all product or just for a particular product, we will not require to set up item charge group. Again, if we define an item charge group, we would also have to associate our product to the group. We can do this on the Sell tab of the Release product form. Then Auto Charge section allows us to define the customer, item, and model delivery combination for which auto charge will applicable. We can select the charge group that we had earlier defined for customer, item, and the delivery mode here so that the auto charge can be effective on the respective groups. With a free tax invoices, we have a recurring process for sending our customer an invoice every month for the next 3 years. This new recurring free tax invoices functionality in Dynamics 365 for finance and operations allows us to completely automate this process. This feature involves 3 steps process for enrolling a customer for the recurring free tax invoices. As a first step, we needed to create a free tax invoices template. One template can be used for multiple customers. Then select the customer we wish to receive the recurring invoice. Each customer can have a multiple template. And finally, generate and post the recurring invoice by run task of generate recurring invoice, or just manually create a new free tax invoice from template. Default values such as terms of payment and method of payment can be automatically filled in from the customer, or we can use the value that were saved in the template. A new free tax invoice is created and we can edit the value as we required. You can use recurring invoice if you must invoice customer for the same amount on the regular basis, where you need to define a free tax invoice template that can be reused to create the invoice. This template contains following information: header information such as tax group, term of payment, and method of payment; line information such as service description, revenue account, unit price, and invoice amount; charges for shipping or handling; account distribution, together with the financial dimension information such as cost center and the business unit. In effect, you are creating an entire invoice and saving it as a template. You can set up the template by using generate recurring invoice page. There are two invoice concepts with sales order invoice. A custom invoice for sales order is a bill that related to the sales and that an organization gives to the customer. This type of a customer invoice is created based on the sales order, which include order line and item number. Item number are specified and posted in the ledger. Subledger journal entries aren't available for the custom invoice for the sales order. A pro forma invoice is an invoice that is prepared as an estimate of the actual invoice amount before the invoice is posted. You can print pro forma invoice either for a custom invoice, for a sales order, or for a free tax invoices. To process payment for a custom invoice, first post and print individual custom invoice that are based on the sales order. When we post an invoice, the invoice remainder quantity for each item is updated with the total of the invoiced quantity from the selected sales order. If both the invoice remainder quantity and the delivered remainder quantity for all items on the sales order are 0, the status of the sales order is changed to invoiced. If invoice remainder quantity isn't 0, the status of the sales order remains unchanged and additional invoice can be entered for it. We can view the status of the sales order on the All Sales Order list page. Use the Open Custom Invoice list page to view the invoice that you post. Then post and print custom invoice that are based on the packing slip and the date. The customer invoice is based on this packing slip and reflects the quantities from them. The financial information for the invoice based on the information that entered when you post the invoice. We can create a custom invoice that is based on the packing slip line item that has been shipped to date, even if all items are particular sales order haven't yet been shipped. We might this if, for example, our legal entity issue one invoice per customer per month that covers all the deliveries that we ship during the month. Each packing slip represents a partial or complete delivery of the item on the sales order. When we post the invoice remainder quantity for each item is updated with the total of the delivered quantity from the selected packing slip. Inventory transactions are updated with the invoice number and the status in the line status field on the sales order is changed to invoiced. View the status of the sales order in the All Sales Order list page. Third step is consolidate sales order or packing slip for posting. Use this process when one or more sales orders are ready to be invoiced and we want to consolidate them into a single invoice. We can select multiple invoices on the sales order list page and then use a general invoice to consolidate them. On the posting invoice page, we can change the summary order setting to summarize by order number, where there are multiple packing slips for the single sales order, or by invoice account, where there are multiple sales orders for a single invoice account. Use the Arrange button to consolidate sales order into a single invoice based on the summary order setting. Additional settings that change the posting behavior. Quantity. Select the quantity on which to base the posting of the document. The available options vary. Depends on the type of document that we are posting, such as packing slip or an invoice. Deliver Now. Select all quantity that are entered in the Deliver Now field. Use this option to confirm or deliver a partial order. Picked. Select all quantity that have been picked, or select all quantity on the sales order that haven't yet been updated by current document type. Packing slip. Select all quantity that has been updated by the packing slip. Pick quantity and not stocked product. Select all quantity that have been picked and all product quantity that aren't stocked. Posting. Select this option to generalize the sales order or create option to print pro forma sales order. Now it's time to process fifth steps to run payment proposal. When customer makes a payment, we need to create and post them in a payment journal, both to record the payment to the customer account and also to ensure that we can reconcile the account receivable information with general ledger information. Use payment proposal as an efficient way to select the payment records and create the payment journal. The payment proposal search for the payment lines that either are due or have a maximum date for the receiving a cash discount. Checks open and approve the customer transactions. Only transactions with either due date or cash discount date are included in the search. As soon as the system generates the payment lines, we can add them in the payment journal. The last step is to enter customer payment page. An alternative to manual creating the payment journal line is using enter customer payment functionality. Use this page to enter, settle, and save customer payment. We can select transaction based on customer account information. Custom invoice information include open invoice, credit note, collection letter. We can also view customer transaction records across multiple companies and define other aspects of the payment line, such as method of payment, offset account type, and so on. If the amount in the amount field of the enter customer payment page does not equal to the total of marked transaction, then the page will display the warning that the payment is not fully settled. Adjust the marked transaction or amount accordingly. If we do not transfer payment to the journal without adjustment, normal overpayment and underpayment posting rules applied. To clear any transaction, select for payment in the Enter Customer Payment page. Select Clear button. We can configure account receivable for credit and collection to track invoice and incoming payment from customer. Additionally, we can set up a customer group, customer, posting profile, various payment option, interest note, collection letter, commission, parameter regarding customers, charges, deliveries, and destinations, bill exchange, and other type of accounting receivable and credit and collecting information. By using customer pool, we easily can manage collection for customers with shared characters. We can create and maintain group of customers who share key parameters. This includes the terms of payment, settle payment, inventory posting ledger account, sales tax group, and default account setup. By setting up the posting profile that control the posting of customer transaction to the general ledger, we can manage what interest and collection letter sequence can be assigned to the customer, group of customers, or all customers. Another consideration for credit and collection module is to make sure that customers' method of payment, terms of payment, charge code, payment date, and payment fee are correctly set up to get the most accurate information about delinquent customers prior to processing the collection. Please note, the configuration of the account receivable module has direct impact on the configuration of the credit and collection modules. During the collection process, we often need to record not sufficient funds NSF, or perhaps suggest to a write-off when a delinquent customer declined to pay their debts. We would then create a journal, for example, one for NSF and another for write-off. To set up the parameter for write-off and then write-off transaction from the collection page, the open a customer invoice page, and the customer page, we can go to the account receivable, set up account receivable parameter, select the collection tab, expand the write-off section. The write-off journal is generated journal that will hold the write-off transaction that you created. We can attach a reason code to every write-off. We can override this default at the time of write-off. Then set the selection to yes if we want to separate the sales tax from the original transaction in the write-off. One of important configuration on collection management is to set up aging period definition. We can using the aging period definition page to analyze the maturity of the customer account and the vendor account based on the date that we enter. The date entered together with the unit and interval information that we entered on the periods tab in this page is used to calculate the date interval for each aging period in the aging period definition page. Each aging period that we set up for the aging period definition corresponds to a column on the list page or in the page or report when the analysis is performed. The aging periods are shown on the list page or in the page on the report in the order in which we set them. We need to use aging period definition to create custom aging snapshot. The aging snapshot are used to display information in the collection page and in related list page. The aging period definition defines columns that appears on the aged balance, collection activities, and collection cases list page. It also defines the periods that appear on the collection page. If a customer pool is set up, aging period definition for the pool is used. If no customer pool are set up, the default aging period definition that is specified on the account receivable parameter page is used. If no default aging period definition is specified, the first aging period definition on the credit and the collection setup aging period definition page is used. With the aging period being set up, create a customer aging snapshot. Aging snapshot provides quick access the aging information for collections, personalized by using aging balance list page in the credit and collection aging balance page. This page includes icon next to the amount due balance field that enable user to quickly identify accounts and their aging status. The aging snapshot must be created before we can view information on the credit and collections aging balanced page. We go to credit and collection periodic task age customer balance to update customer aging snapshot. For each customer, an aging snapshot contains the following elements: an aging snapshot header, one or more company aging snapshot headers, detailed records for each aging period in the aging period definition, create aging snapshot records for all customers or for the customer in the customer pool. Optionally, we can set up a customer pool to represent a group of customers. We can use customer pool as filter for customer information appear on the credit and the collection setup customer pool page, or when we create aging snapshot. Here are examples that might be used for customer pool. Customer who have a balance over the specific amount. Customer in specific countries, region, or districts. Type of customers. Customer group by size, volume, or frequency of ordering. Other option is create collection agent. If multiple people in your organization do collections work, we can set up a collection team. We can select the team on the account receivable page, parameter page. Before workers can create activity or send email message by using collection page, we need to verify that the Microsoft Outlook synchronization configuration key is selected and the Outlook synchronization is set up for those workers. If we don't create a collection team, a team is created automatically when we set up collection agent on the credit and collection setup collection agent page. Use the collection agent page to set up employee and contracts as a collection agent and optionally assign customer pool to them. A collection agent is person who work with the customers to make sure that payments are collected in the timely manner. If multiple people in our organization do collections works, we can set up collection agents who are set up user on the user relationship page. We can assign customer pool, customer queries to collection agent to help the agent organize their work. The collection agent are added to the team that is selected on the account receivable parameter page. If team isn't selected on the page, a new team that is named collection is automatically created and the collection agent are added to them. Set up a collection case category. If we plan to use case to organize our collection work, set up a case category that has been the collection category type. Go to Organization Administration, set up case category to create collection case categories. This setup is required only if we want to use the case functionality on the credit and the collection. Set up email and address setting for collection customer contacts. Set up email address for customer contacts if we want to send email message to those contacts from collection page. The collection contact is used as a default contact on the collection page. We can set up a statement address for customer if a statement should use an address other than the primary address. On the credit and collection fast tab for customer, in the collection contact field, select the person in the customer organization who works with our collection agent. This person is used as default contact on the collection page. And email message are sent to him or her. If a collection contact isn't specified for a customer, the primary contact for the customer is used. If the primary contact isn't specified, email messages are sent to the first address that is listed on the contact page. As we just reviewed, manage customer credit and collection involve steps like process collection letter, working with case and activities, send an email message, perform write-off. The perform write-off, we can write off a customer balance from a aged balance A page, write off transaction using the collection page, write off a customer balance using customer page. Now let's start on Module 4, Configure and using budget in Dynamics 365 for finance and operations. The budget module in Dynamics 365 for finance and operations allows you to set up, create, and view budget. Budgeting can include budget control, which you can use to monitor the budget funds that are available for planned and actual purchase and expenditures. When you exceed budget, finance operations shows a warning message, or it can prevent expenditures when you are over budget. You can create budget register entries for original budget, budget transfer, and budget revisions. Additionally, you can create budget register entries for encumbrance and pre-encumbrance for purchase and planned expenditures. Budget register entry can be created automatically when you are transferring budget to the general ledger from other modules such as project management and accounting or fixed assets. Finance and operations can transfer fixed assets or demand supply forecast budget to the budget registers. With the budgeting module, you can determine which financial dimension from the chart of account will be available for basic budgeting and budget control. When you configure budget control, you can define budget interval, budget cycle time span, budget threshold, budget managers, and budget group. Calculation that is used to check the available budget funds. Budgeting includes three primary configuration keys. Budget enable basic budgets. Budget control adds the budget control to the basic budgeting. Public sector adds two budget types to basic budgeting that are used by public sector organizations. Other configuration key might implement additional budgeting features that are related to the budgeting requirements in specific countries or regions. Basic budgeting includes financial dimensions that are defined for budgeting, budgeting register entry, and the budgeting workflow. Budget control is used with basic budgeting. Budgeting control include budgeting type for pre-encumbrance and encumbrance, budgeting checking for source, document, and accounting journal, and features such as financial dimension that are defined for budgeting control, over budget permission for user group, and the budget funds available calculation. The public sector configuration include the preliminary budget and appointment budget type. To use budget control, we should first set up basic budgeting. If we are using the public sector configuration, set it up at the same time as we are setting up the basic budgeting. Let's first understand plan basic budgeting. We use basic budgeting in finance operations. We need to compile information about how the budget should be configured before we begin to configuration. Before we begin configure basic budgeting or budget control, we should compile information about which financial dimension and main account will be used for budgeting, and then can have amounts transferred either to or from them. Main accounts are optional but used by most. Define currency exchange rate and what those exchange rates are. Set up budget code for each budget type and determine which code is the default budget code. Decide which budget register entry will use workflow. We can assign workflow to budget code. the budget register entries that are associated with the budget code that has an assigned workflow are automatically submitted to workflow for approval. Provide the name of each budget model. Choose how the budget cycle will be set up. Determine the amount that will be allocated across a period or two other financial dimension value. Select financial dimension that will have recurring amount. Decide which budget model will be used in cash flow forecast. Now, let's understand plan budget control. If we use budget control compile information in addition the information in the plan basic budget topic, financial dimensions that should be included in the budget control rows. Use a group that can post entries that exceed remaining balance for a budget. Source document and accounting journal that should be enabled for budget control. Financial dimension and account that must have budget threshold and what the threshold will be. A budget threshold is the level of a budget usage at which we can prevent posting or display warning message. For example, if a threshold is 80, we can warn a user during the entry that 80% of the budget for the select account has been reached. The formula for calculating the remaining balance of budget, the budget funds available calculating can be defined for each legal entity instead of always using the calculation original budget minus actual expense. The interval such as monthly, quarterly, or yearly that is used to determine whether the available budget balance is enough to cover the transactions. Several methods are available for defining budget in your organization. Two of those methods most used are zero-based budgeting, which is method planning and decision making that reverses the working process of a traditional budgeting. Historical budgeting, sometimes referred to as incremental budgeting, uses budget prepared by using previous periods budget or actual performance as a base with the increment amount added for the new budget period. In zero-based budgeting, every department function is reviewed comprehensively and all expenditure must be approved rather than only increase. No reference is made to the previous level of expenditure. Zero-based budgeting requires the budget request be justified in complete detail by each division manager, starting from the zero base. The zero based is indifferent to whether the total budget is increasing or decreasing. Some advantage of using zero-based budgeting include allocating resources efficiently because it's based on needs and benefits, driving managers to find cost-effectively way to improve operations, helping to detect inflated budgets, identify and helping you eliminate wasteful and obsolete operations, identify opportunities for outsourcing, forcing cost centers to identify their mission and their relationship to overall goals, helping to identify areas of wasteful expenditure, and if desired, it can also be used for suggesting alternative course of action. With historical budgeting, the allocation of the resources is based upon allocation from the previous period. The approach is not recommended because it fails to take into account changes circumstances. Moreover, the encouraged spending up to the budget to ensure reasonable allocation in the next period. It leads to a spend it or lost it mentality. Advantage of historical budgeting include budget is stable and change is gradual. Manager can operate their department on the consistent basis. The system relatively simple to operate and easy to understand. Conflicts are avoided when department appears to be treated similarly. Coordination between budgets is more efficient to achieve. The impact of change can be seen quickly. We can use basic budgeting to define the financial dimension for budgeting, create budget model, and set up and use budget register entry. We can also set up optional budgeting workflow to automate the review of budget register entry, include budget transfer. For example, if approval is required for transfer a budget amount from one department to another, then workflow functionality helps to create an approval workflow. Almost every company that uses financial functionality in finance operations must be able to create report of budget versus actual. Before we use basic budgeting, we need to complete the step shown here. If using budget control, we need to set up basic budgeting before we configure the budget control. The required include define budget exchange rate, define budgeting parameter and the number sequence, define financial dimension for budgeting, create budget models, define budget codes. Optionally, we can define budget transfer role, set up budgeting workflow, set up budgeting allocation terms. The approved budget for legal entity is maintained in the document that known as budget register entry. The line in the budget register entry document are known as a budget account entry and contains a financial dimension information, date, and amount of the approved budget. The budget register entry document is integrated with basic financial report and inquiry page where ledger actual amount are compared to the budget amount. When we configure budgeting, start on the budgeting parameter page. On this page, we define budgeting journal, the number sequence for the budgeting register entry, and the default behavior in the workspace. Next, if policy existing that govern the approval of budget register entry based on the budget type, for example, transfer or revisions, we need to create budget register entry workflow on the budgeting workflow page. If scenarios occur where the transfer might be allowed without workflow approval, we can define budget transfer role to support those scenarios. We use budget dimension page to specify which financial dimension in the account structure that are associated with the chart of account are available for budgeting. Some organizations might not define specific financial dimension, including the main account for budgeting, which could provide more flexibility. For example, the account structure for the chart of account might have a department, cost center, and main account financial dimensions. If we select department and a cost center financial dimension for budgeting, the department and cost center can hold budget amount without regard to which main account is used. On the budgeting dimension page, select the financial dimension that are used for budgeting based on the dimension that are used in the chart of account. We can select all financial dimensions or subset of them for budgeting. Define a budgeting model that corresponds to all or some of the budgets. We can use a single budget model for all budget register entry. Alternatively, we can create separate models that are based on the budget type, the geographical location, or some other way that a budget can be classified. If budget control is used, we can associate only budget model with the specific budget cycle time span. Create a budget code that identifies the type of a budget transaction to record and any related workflow. Budget code can support the original budget, transfer, revision, encumbrance, pre-encumbrance, carry forward budget. Budget code let us to have an audit trail of approval budget modifications throughout the course of the budget cycle. If a workflow is associated with a budget code, it will be enabled for all budget register entry that use that budget code, and we will need to complete workflow steps before the budget register entry can reach to the complete stage. We can also optionally set a budget transfer role. To use budget transfer role, select the use role for budget transfer on the budget parameter page. When the budget transfer role are used, if user creates a document by using a budget code of the transfer type, budget balance won't be updated if the budget transfer role are validated. For example, we can allow budget transfer document where the expense budget is transferred between the main account for sales and marketing department, but can prohibit budget from being transferred from or to the department unless workflow approval has been granted for the type of budget account entries. We can use a budget model page to create various budget model. We can use single budget model for all or some of the budgets, or we can create budget model for each budget. A budget model can contain many submodels, which we attach the budget model on the submodel FASTAB. For example, we can carry a budget that has submodel that represents the various departments of the legal entities. Budget models that are used as a submodel cannot contain other submodels. Also, if we use budget control, we cannot use the budget model that have a submodels. On the budget transfer role page, we can define budget transfer role to determine when the budget transfer are allowed between the financial dimension value. For example, budget transfer in the specific department might be allowed without approval, but transfer across department might have to be reviewed and approved before the budget balance is adjusted. If a budget register entry is submitted and it's violated the budget transfer rule, the transfer can be completed only if it's approved through the budget workflow. Some organization requires that budget register entry and the budget account entry be approved by user other than the person who entered them. We can require manual approval, workflow approval, or no approval. If we use budget control, we can set up a workflow so that the budget manager approves the entries. We can also set up a budget transfer role to work with the budgeting workflow. For example, we could set up a budget transfer role to allow only budget transfer within department. After the budget transfer role is defined, we could create a workflow to route the budget transfer to specific user to approval for the budgeting transfer between the department. We can use a budgeting allocation terms page to define the financial dimension value and the percentage that will be used to generate allocation in the budget account entries for the budget register entry. This is optional procedure for setting up the budgeting. Depend on how we configure budget control. Source document and accounting journal can be prevented from additional processing when a budget check indicates that the budget amount are not available. Set up basic budgeting before we configure budget control. If we plan to use the budgeting workflow, create the workflow and assign them to the budget code. When we set up the basic budgeting, set up budget control configuration before we start submitting the budget register entry. The budget control configuration provides an active version and a draft version. We can modify the draft version when the active version is turned on and the budget control is inactive. We can select restore from active at any time when we are working on a draft version. However, if we select restore from active, all changes that the draft version are lost. If the budget control configuration is active, select edit to modify the budget control configuration. Budget cycle time span. A budget cycle time span defines the length of the budget cycle. Budget cycles are associated with the period in the fiscal calendar and can be shared across legal entities. Budget cycle determines the starting and ending period for the budgeting control. We can map budget cycle time span to the fiscal year, or we can specify a number of the period for part of the fiscal year or span fiscal years. We can assign the budget model to the budget cycle to perform budget checking for the budget cycle. Only one budget model can be in use for the budget cycle. A budget check is performed when the accounting date for the source document or accounting journal that is enabled for budgeting control is in the budget cycle. After basic budgeting is configured, we can define the time or the starting and ending period for budgeting and budgeting control on the budget cycle time span page. Budget cycle often correspond to the fiscal calendar, but can span fiscal year. Define parameters. Based on the financial dimension that are enabled for the budget, we can use all the financial dimensions for the budget control or subset of them. Additionally, we can specify the default time interval, for example, fiscal year to date, fiscal period, or quarterly. That budget control will be performed for in the related budget cycle time span. We can also specify a default budget manager and the threshold that is used to notify user when the threshold has been reached. The value in this field will be used as default value in any new budget control role or budget group that is created. However, the default value can be changed for individual group or roles. The way that budgets are created and recorded in the budget register help determine the time span that is selected when available budget funds are evaluated. If an annualized amount for the dimension value combination is developed and used, a fiscal year or fiscal year to date approach might make sense. However, if an organization that creates budgets by fiscal period or allocated to the fiscal period wants more detailed control, it might want to consider fiscal period to date or quarterly time span. In addition, an organization's culture, as it's related to the budgeting and the budgetary control, also help define the configuration. Over budget permission. The over budget permission tab, we can specify user groups. We can also specify whether users who are member of the group have a permission to exceed the budget. We can prevent the user from exceeding the budget past the budget threshold that was set on the budget parameter page, or we can prevent them from exceeding the budget by any amount, regardless of the threshold. Depends on how proactively an organization manages its spending. This permission can help manage its financial resources. Select main account. If a main account isn't selected as a budget control dimension on the defined parameter page, but specified expenditure are being managed, we can select those expenditure on the Select Main Account tab. If a main account is selected as a budget control dimension, no entry is required. Assign budget model. On the Assign Budget Model tab, we can assign budget model to the budget cycle time span. that should be included in the budget control. Define budget control role. On the Define budget control role tab, we create a specified role based on the financial dimensions that are enabled for budget control. Budget control roles are the required for budget control. They determine the financial dimension value combination for the budget control. If we select the department and cost center financial dimension for budget control, we can define roles for specific combination of department and cost center that are subject to budget control. We can define different thresholds for each budget control role. Criteria in 2 or more roles that covers the same financial dimension value are not allowed. If all the financial dimension value combination will be enabled for the budget control, we can define a budget control role without criteria. The budget control roles are validated against the ledger account that are being used on the source document according to distribution and accounting journal. If the financial dimension in the ledger account match the financial dimension in the budget control role, a budget check occurs. Budget control will be enabled for any main account of the profit and loss, expense, balance sheet, liability, equity, or assets type. If this type contains a row that has empty criteria, budget control will be enabled for all financial dimension combination that is include main account of those type. Therefore, make sure that you create the budget control role that defines only the range of the financial dimension combination where it's important for budget control to be turned on. On budget funds available, we can define the formula that is used to calculate available budget funds depends on how conservatively an organization manages its financial resources, or depends on the regulation or industry requirement. The calculation can include draft or unposted documents. If calculation is modified during the budget cycle, the change won't affect any document that previously passed the budget control check and that will posted or completed. On the Document and Journal tab, we can select which source document and journal will be subject to budget control checks and whether the check will occur at the level of the line entry or the whole document. We should match the source document that are selected with the checkbox for the balance that are included in the calculation of available budget funds. For example, if we select budget reservation for encumbrance, we should select the purchase order option. When budget is performed for the amount and account on the purchase line, the budget control category that is assigned to the reservation is encumbrance. When a budget check is performed for the amount and account on the purchase requisition, the budget control category that is assigned to the reservation in the pre-encumbrance. If budget reservation for encumbrance and or budget reservation for pre-encumbrance is included in the calculation of available budget funds and must be reflected through the posting in the general ledger, we should enable committed accounting on the general ledger parameter page. On the Define Budget Group tab, we can optionally define unique combination of a financial dimension where budget resources are pooled for the secondary budget checking. In the Define Budget Group tab of the Budget Control Configuration page, we can define optional budget group to form a budget pool or a collection of a financial dimension value whose budget will be pooled for the secondary budget check. The financial dimension combination that are found in the budget control row are always checked for budget amount. If a financial dimension combination is also found in the budget group, a second budget check is performed at the budget group level. We can create a single record that is include whole organization, or we can define multiple groups to represent individual department or cost centers. Multiple criteria can be specified for budget group. All the criteria are used to determine the financial dimension combination for the budget group. No overlapping criteria are allowed across the budget group and budget group members. To perform the secondary budget check, the over budget option for the budget group check setting in the use group budget permission page for budget control role must be set to perform budget group check when budget funds are not available. If a user belongs to multiple user group and you select one user group that include the user, no warning message will be displayed for that user. In budget control, warning message should be surprised for any user group. We can specify those groups on the define message level page. After budget control has been configured, we can turn it on to activate it on the Active Budget Control tab. The draft version will then become effective. After budget control is turned on and active, and after transactions are posted, it should not be turned off middle year. When budget control is turned off, activities aren't recorded for budget control purpose, and budget check are no longer performed. Therefore, documents that have already been posted might not correctly reflect any relieving amount or balance in inquiry or report that are related to the budget control. This includes the budget control status for any downstream or adjusting document and journals. We can use a budget plan to create a budget plan to define the expected revenue and expenditure for a budget plan process, analyze and update budget plan for multiple scenarios, automatically wrote the budget plan together with worksheets, justification document, and other attachment for review and approval. Consolidate multiple budget plans from the lower level of the organization into the single parent budget plan at the higher level of the organization. You can also develop a single budget plan at a higher level of the organization and allocate the budget to the lower level of the organization. Typically, we perform budget plan when we are preparing the budgets that our organization will implement. An organization can configure budget plan and then set up budget plan process to meet its policy, procedure, and requirement for the budget preparing. Before implementing budget plan, we need to be familiar with the terms in the budget plan in Dynamics 365 Finance. Budget plan process, which is determining how budget plan can be updated, wrote, reviewed, and approved in the budgeting organization hierarchy. A budgeting plan process is linked to the budget cycle and an organization through legal entities. Budget plan contains the budget data for budget plan process. We can have a multiple budget plan that are used for various purposes. For example, budget plan can be used to create budget amount for different organizational units, or they can help us to make comparison and informed decision. Budget plan scenario define categories of data for the budget plans. We can define budget plan scenario to support monetary and other unit of measure classes such as quantity. Example of a budget plan scenario that used quantity include previous year's support costs and full-time equivalent count. Budget plan stage defines the steps that a budget plan follows from its inception to final approval. Budget plan stages are arranged in the budget plan workflow. Budget plan workflow consists of and defined budgeting planning stages. Budget plans workflow are associated with budgeting workflow. Budgeting workflow are the automated and manual process that move budget plan through the budget plan stage. Budget plan is integrated with other Dynamics 365 Finance modules. Therefore, we can bring in the information from previous budgets, actual expenditure, fixed assets, and human resources. Because budget plan is also integrated with Microsoft Excel and Microsoft Word, we can use this program to work with budget plan data. For example, a budget manager can export department's budget requests from a budget plan scenario into Excel worksheets. The data can be analyzed, updated, and charted in the worksheet, and then published back to the budget plan lines. An option but recommended first step is to create budget planning schema that shows our organization's procedure for formulating a budget. We can use any method that we want to create this schema. We can design an organization hierarchy as budget planning hierarchy for each budget planning process. Because this hierarchy is used to aggregate and distribute data, we might want it to have a different structure. Only one organization hierarchy can be assigned to each budget planning process. Budget plan can follow one or two security models to define user permission. To specify the security model, access budgeting, setup budgeting plan to set up budgeting plan parameter on the budgeting plan configuration page. Budget plan workflows are used in budgeting workflow to manage the creation of evaluation of the budget plans. The budget plan workflow consists of ordered set of stages that a budget plan moves through. Each budget plan workflow is associated with a budgeting workflow. Budgeting workflow are one of the types of workflow that are used to throughout the finance. The budgeting workflow routes the budget plan together with the worksheets, justification, and attachment through the organization for review and approval. We can create the budget plan workflow in the workflow stage section of the budget plan configuration page. There, we can select the stage and the budgeting workflow that will be used and also configure additional settings. A unique budget plan workflow is typically required for each level of our hierarchy. It is good practice is to create a budget plan workflow for each level of a budgeting hierarchy. Then we can assign the budgeting workflow that contains elements that correspond to the stage in the budget plan workflow. The budget workflow moves the budgeting plan through the stages by means of the stage transition workflow tasks that we add in the workflows designer. The initial setting on the budgeting plan configuration page let us create building block for the later configuration steps. Parameters defines the security role that we want to apply to the budgeting plan and default financial dimensions that should be used when user drilling into the budget plan scenario amount. Scenarios encompass the categories of the data that you want for the budgeting plan. We can define the budget plan scenario to support monetary and other unit of measure class such as quantity. In a budget plan, scenarios represent one version of the budget plan data. Stages defines the steps that a budget plan follow from the inceptions to final approval. Example for budgeting plan stage include HQ, roll up CFO review, and final. In budget plan, we can allocate the amount or quantity on the budget plan lines from the scenario to another scenario or even to same scenario. For example, we might allocate the same scenario if we want to apply the change to the financial dimension or the dates of the amount in that scenario. An allocation can be done within the budget plan or from one budget plan to another. Allocation schedule defines how an allocation should be performed and what scenarios are involved based on the next configuration sequence, which is stage allocation tab. Stage allocation are used to define when allocation schedule for budget plan lines should be automatically run during the workflow process. When the stage allocation are used, budgeting plan lines in the destination scenario can be created and modified without the intervention of the budget plan preparing on the review. We can optionally use budget plan priorities to define categories and objectives for the budget plan that we have set up. We can also use the priority to organize, classify, and evaluate several budget plans. For example, we can create a budget plan priority for health and safety and then evaluate budget plan that are associated to that priority. We can also assign number of rank budget plan across all budget plans. Budget figure appears on the budget plan in column and layout rows and columns. We need to first define the column, and then we can create a layout, define the presentation of the column. To define a column, select a budget plan scenario. The line amount from the scenario are shown as the budget plan. We can select the period to filter the amount, and we can also apply the filter that are based on the ledger account. After we finish the configuration in the budget plan, we can set up budget planning process on the budget setup budget planning process page. Budget planning process are a set of roles that determine how budget plan can be updated, rotated, reviewed, and approved in the budgeting organization hierarchy. For each budget plan process, we first select the budget cycle and the ledger. Each budget plan process is related to only one budget cycle and one ledger. Then select the budget organization hierarchy on the budget plan process administration fast tab and assign the budget plan workflow to all the responsibility centers in the organization that appears in the grid. To assign or change the budget planning workflow for similar responsibility centers, select Assign Workflow and then select the organization type to target and the budget plan workflow to use. The budgeting workflow ID that is associated with each budget plan workflow is automatically added to the group. When we define the stage role and the template on the budget plan stage role and the layout fast tab of the budget plan, we can define different set of roles and the default layout for each budget plan stage. For example, the sales department estimate the stage can let user modify the lines in the budget plan, but prohibit user from adding lines. The submitted stage can let user to view lines, but not add or modify them. Because the work at the data stage has been completed, and the change to the budget plan must be prevented. To select the layout that are available for budget plan, select the alternate layout. We can optionally select the budget plan priorities on the budget plan priority constraints fast tab. Priorities can then be selected on the budget plan. The final step is to activate the budget plan process from the action menu, a budget plan process cannot be used until it's being activated. On the action menu, we can also create a new process by copying the existing process. This feature is useful for organizations that follow the same process flow for each budget cycle and make few changes or no changes. Another useful command on the action menu is view budget process status. This command graphically displays the budget plan within the process, together with relevant data such as plan's workflow status, summarized by the amount and by unit, and one-click navigation to the budget plan themselves. Thank you for attending this session.
Thanks for sharing all the great information. I hope our participants will really benefit from it. Don't forget to join us for the third and last part of this session series of exam prep on MB-310 Microsoft Dynamics 365 Finance. So we'll see you in the next part of this series. Bye!